Throughout World of Warcraft's history, there's always been players pushing their performance and aiming to be the best that they possibly can. Whether it was back then with huge game-changing updates, bug fixes and napkin maths, to today with meticulous preparation, massive sponsor-led raid rosters, and people salaried to develop cutting-edge weak auras. When you want to be the best in the world, you need every advantage that you can possibly get. From every consumable, known raid tactic and class, it all adds up and makes a difference. And as World of Warcraft has progressed through the expansions, competition has grown incredibly fierce at the top end, and there is now more on the line than there has ever been before. At the start of Uldir in Battle for Azeroth, Method led the way by fully streaming their progression. This was a total game changer moment. In the early days of WoW, guilds would actively hide information from competition as much as they possibly could. It was a race of not just time investment but planning and strategy, and you simply didn't give that kind of information away for free. And whilst there are many reasons why streaming made sense, it would also make the top guilds considerably more adverse to testing the waters as for what would lead to a ban. Imagine planning a huge event and then bug abusing and getting a 7 or 8 day ban. That is a losing the race and then some. But in the older days of World of Warcraft, well, let's just say guilds were a lot more open to experimentation if it meant that they could get an edge over their competition. It was seen more as, we have found this thing, we can only assume it's a matter of time until other people do too, and it's up to Blizzard to fix it, rather than, oh, this is clearly not intended, better report it, don't want to get banned. So today I thought I'd go over some of the most famous ways that world-first guilds have caught a ban wave after bug abusing. These are the times where the world-first guilds went too far. But first, a quick word from another mmorpg, which you just might have heard of, Final Fantasy XIV Online. Final Fantasy XIV Online is a huge storied universe that takes place on Eorzea, featuring a massive open world, tons of quests, dungeons, raiding content, PvP, collections, and tons more. In the game, you can play all jobs on a single character, so there's no need to re-roll fresh if you wanted to try something new, so you can really get invested into your one character as a main. The trial version of the game also includes 14 jobs, so you can pick and choose and find what suits you best. You can play for free now up to level 60 through 2 award-winning expansions, with no limitations on in-game time. On top of that, existing or new purchasers of A Realm Reborn can add Stormblood to their account for free for a limited time. So whether you already have the game or have been considering it, you can get an absolute load of extra content for free. I'm sure if you follow the MMO scene, you know that Final Fantasy XIV has been growing hugely over time, and growth like this happens for a reason. You can try Final Fantasy XIV Online out for free today by clicking the link down in the description. Many thanks to Final Fantasy XIV Online for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. The first one I have is from a top guild back from vanilla. Though technically not during a world first race, this is just such an insane exploit that I wanted to put it here. Remember AQ40 in Classic? Don't you just hate that trash between Twin Emperors and Cthulhu? It's got to be the main reason people take a disliking to this instance, and it feels as though Blizzard budgeted all the trash for this instance during this hallway. Especially if you didn't scout too, because you could scout the raid ID with Mind Vision or Eagle Eye. The Mind Slayers share a spawn with just regular Slayers, and you could have a weak aura that would count both of them. You wanted as few Mind Slayers as possible due to their mana burn and mind control making them really annoying. So if you get too many Mind Slayers, you go reset the ID and go check again. It was mainly speedrunners that did this in Classic, and no, they didn't get banned. Anyway, that's just Classic stuff. In any event, I doubt they had this scouting worked out back in vanilla, so they just had to go into AQ40 and hope and pray that they don't get an Oops or Mind Slayer's ID. That on top of the rest of the instance, of course, which ain't exactly all that short either, is it? But what if you just wanted to skip to the final boss? One guild during vanilla did create their own way to skip directly to Cthulhu, though phases such as bug abuse or clever use of game mechanics don't even come close to what they did. Overrated was a top US guild, claiming at the time to be the only US Horde guild to have Naxxramas cleared, but a few items remained elusive and desirable from Cthulhu. But how do you convince a full raid of 40 people to go back to this instance when you already have Nax on clear? One overrated member, Cletus, shed some light on the situation here, saying while most of the guild were aware of the possible consequences, we basically had to do it. Since the majority of our guild's equipment is beyond that offered in the Temple of AQ, there's little incentive for our raiders to go there at all. Basically, all we get from there is a nasty repair bill, and the only loot worth anything drops off the last boss, so naturally it came to the point where only a handful wanted to go to AQ because of the incredible cost of time and gold, with little reward. So how did they skip all the way to Cthulhu? Well, if you've ever looked at the entry room of AQ40, you might have just noticed that Prophet Skerum's platform is actually very close to Cthulhu's chamber, right at the end of the instance. It's more or less above it, in fact. But Overrated didn't just find a way to clip through a wall or anything like that. They went much further. Through modifying an actual game file named patch5.mpq, they were able to delete the entire floor under Skerum, allowing them to run straight through what would have otherwise been hours of raiding and dropping in right outside the final hallway to Cthulhu. Unsurprisingly, eventually Blizzard caught wind that a top guild had literally been modifying the game's files to skip to a boss, and were not very happy about that. In one of the most direct and harsh punishments for the hack, Blizzard permanently banned every account with a raid ID matching either of the two instances where they had exploited. Many of the Overrated members would go on to make new accounts and continue playing on into TBC, but this is one of the times when Blizzard did not hesitate with the ban hammer. Let's fast forward a bit into Wrath of the Lich King, our current classic expansion, and a source of some of the most famous bans for exploiting we have ever seen. So Wrath, even back in the day, was a bit of a roller coaster when it came to raid difficulty. Tier 7 with a revamped Naxxramas was wiped out in a matter of days from the expansion launch, and Blizzard wanted to create something for the top end guilds to aim for. So enter Ulduar and Hard Mode, a brand new take on raiding, with many of the bosses having unique ways to enable a more difficult version of the encounter. One of the most customizable fights in the raid was Yogg-Saron. After having defeated the Titan Keepers, you can enlist their aid to make the fight significantly easier, from giving your raid more health or damage, slowing enemy cast speeds, to straight up having a cheat death effect. But taking on Yogg without the help of any keepers would enable perhaps the hardest challenge the raid had to offer, and a ton of guilds at the time were hard stuck on trying to crack the incredibly high DPS required to finish off the last phase before getting overwhelmed. The problem were the immortal guardians that Yogg summons. Without Thorim helping, they are truly immortal, and as the fight goes on, they become a soft enrage mechanic. One guild, however, found a rather creative way to deal with these adds in the final phase. The guild Exodus found the following glitch, saying the glitch occurs when someone stays in Yogg-Saron's brain room, as they can still get threat from the guardians that appear in the third phase. This means if you have someone inside the brain room generating threat with heals, the guardians will try to go after them, causing evaded attacks, automatically allowing all DPS to target Yogg-Saron. This completely trivializes the hardest final phase of the fight. As to the exact way this was pulled off, they didn't specify, but it's speculated a paladin used divine intervention on a player and a warlock uses hellfire, so they both die inside the brain room without actually interacting with any mechanics that happen, so they don't get thrown out of it after the phase ends automatically. Both players use a Soul Stone, Paladin Mana Pots, Divine Please, and activates Righteous Fury, and the lock just stands there and life taps, so the Paladin has something to heal. This means the Paladin inside the brain room is generating a ton of threat, and all the adds outside are still attempting to target him, but can never reach him. Exodus decided to go ahead and make the most of this discovery by securing the world first kill, as well as submitting a bug report to Blizzard on the fact that this was possible. Blizzard themselves were not very amused that they had chosen to follow through with this bug, stripping them of their server first titles, gear earned, as well as handing out a 72-hour ban. The real world first would come about a month later by Taiwanese guild stars, putting on an impressive display of coordination and DPS to take down what was at the time the hardest encounter that Blizzard had ever made. But wait, there is more. There was actually some modern day controversy around the Yogg-Saron fight over on the Korean servers. Before the race to Ulduar in Modern Classic ever began, Blizzard had stepped in to tell players to behave and play by the rules, saying we are watching this raid closely and will take action against raid groups found to be using methods like these, just meaning exploits in general, including potentially issuing suspensions and stripping Realm First Death's Demise titles. One guild, however, appropriately named Innocents, used what would be considered by many as an exploit to secure their Realm First Yogg 0 kill. Late on in the fight, players who have been dealing heavy damage to the ads need to kite them out to buy the remaining DPS enough time to defeat Yogg before the ads start running loose and one-shotting everyone. Here you can see the paladin running and jumping into a wall, causing the ads to briefly pause before resuming their chase. This buys the raid about 10 more seconds, which doesn't sound like much, but it's super important with how tight first kills on this encounter are. I have to say, I've used this technique all the time back when I was doing Dire Maul East runs in Classic. Please don't ban me, Blizz. It works because when your character is in the air and facing a wall, sometimes the game doesn't know where your destination point is, so mobs don't have a way to follow you. This means they stop. You land, they start chasing you again, you jump, they stop again. Repeat. Either way, what do you think? Should Blizzard have taken action here, or is this just some good old clever use of game mechanics? Next is probably the most well-known guild ban of all time for exploiting, but one I'd be remiss not to cover here, though hopefully I can add a bit more background to the story rather than just what happened during the ban. In fact, I could probably do a whole video on the history of this guild from its rise to its downfall. Of course, I could only ever be talking about Nihilum or Insidia here. Nihilum was pre-Wrath of the Lich King, and a guild that was at the peak of raiding from early on in vanilla to the end of the Burning Crusade. Moving on into Wrath, they merged with SK Gaming to form Insidia. This guild has a long and storied history with creative use of game mechanics to ensure that they were always on the #1 spot, though amazingly somehow only had one full guild ban placed against them. Perhaps that's part of what makes it such a famous moment. Where do you even start with this guild though? On Cthulhu in AQ40, they found out that the companion pet, the disgusting Oozling's debuff, had the ability to stack and push boss mechanics off the debuff table on Lady Vash, purposefully resetting the fight at a specific moment so the boss reset with minimal health and a single player could resurrect and finish her off in one hit. Or Hodia hard mode, dragging the trash over from Freya's room and having mages spell steal a buff, causing them to deal far more damage than they should have been able to. When it comes to a clean record of scoring world firsts, Insidia has a bit of a murky history to say the least. They've shown in the past that if it meant they would be world first, there's a pretty good chance they would go ahead and do whatever it takes. What would finally get them a ban though would be on the final boss of the expansion, Arthas, the Lich King. So at the time, Blizzard was still being pretty experimental with how raids worked. In ICC, heroic mode was released in a staggered fashion, with later wings of the raid each being a couple weeks apart, as well as you needing to have defeated bosses on normal mode before starting them on heroic. And it was Insidia's Lich King normal world first that would cause all of the drama. So as part of the encounter, the outer edges of the platform you fight on are destroyed. This makes dealing with the likes of Defile, which is a cloud that expands when anyone stands in it, harder, as well as completely removing the need to kill off the Valkyr that spawned during the fight. These are supposed to pick players up and drop them off of the platform. Instead, they were just repositioning them very slowly. The reason as to why the platform was being rebuilt was a player using the engineering item Saronite bombs. These were often used by players to this day to add to their DPS, but these bombs were causing a part of the platform that should have been destroyed to, well, rebuild itself. No, it does not make a ton of sense, but that's what happened. When Blizzard caught wind of this, all members of Insidia were issued with a swift removal of achievements and items gained, as well as a 72-hour ban due to what had happened. What makes this ban so memorable and talked about are the fact that the actions leading to it are kind of reasonable, to be honest. Any high-end DPS will use Saronite bombs in their rotation. This still happens today in Wrath Classic. It's just a coincidence it caused the bug to happen. So why did they get banned? Well, this is the Lich King, perhaps the most iconic antagonist in World of Warcraft's history. Imagine how deflated players would have been to see his first defeat even on normal mode, was due to bug abuse. But it's equally as possible that Exodus's ban on Yogg 0 was a bit of a precedent here. If you find something which is clearly a bug on an end boss and you decide to exploit it for a kill, you are going to get banned. They did get the same treatment as Exodus did too, with achievements and items being removed and a 72-hour ban. In the end, this did set Insidia back on the world first race, but remember that an attempt system still existed at the time, and when Lich King was first available, I believe it was somewhere in the region of between 10 to 20 attempts across all heroic bosses reset. So whilst the ban might have been dramatic, ultimately I'm not sure it really made a big difference to progression. Having ults to do practice runs and learn mechanics was way more important. Either way, a new guild would rise up and claim the world first here. Remarkably, a full Finnish speaking guild, and a guild that would go on to totally dominate the next expansion right up till the end. Aragon. So along comes the next expansion, the Cataclysm, and oh boy does raiding take a leap in difficulty. No longer did Blizzard bother with delaying Wings of the Raid opening or an attempt system, they just dropped the full raid and said, there you go, have fun. Paragon were at the helm of Cataclysm, raiding the whole way through, smashing through some of the toughest fights Blizzard had ever created, such as a second encounter with Nefarian, the Windlord Alakir, and of course a revamped Ragnaros with legs. Though it was the final tier of the expansion, the controversy-ridden Dragon Soul, where they took a hit to their reputation and landed themselves with an 8-day ban. So you'll probably know one of the things introduced to the game alongside Dragon Soul was looking for raid. This aimed to get more casual players into the raiding scene by allowing them to queue up through an interface to see content whenever they wanted, instead of having to be tied into a schedule, a guild, or dealing with pugs. And as a new feature, there were some unintended interactions to be had here. One of those was discovered by Paragon and exploited. Here's what they said about the method they used. We found out that you can loot past loot on bosses regardless of your save status if you zone out and back into the instance. This did not provide the raid with any extra loot, but it did eliminate a major portion of the RNG that would have been involved in simply doing personal runs for everyone. And despite it being LFR gear, this did matter for tier set bonuses, which at the time were very powerful, and even an LFR piece of gear to make your 4 set was well worth it for some classes. Similar to Insidia's story at the end of Wrath, this ban put Paragon behind on the race, and they would end up falling short of sweeping the entire expansion. Korea's Kin Raiders would take the top spot and the world first of the Madness of Deathwing. Though can I just say, Paragon's world 4th and Method's world 5th were less than 20 minutes apart. You don't see that too often. And since that moment in the Dragon Soul, it really had been a very long time since any top guilds were caught with bans on the race to the world first. One of the more recent ones came during a smaller raid in Legion, the Trial of Valor. This was also the first raid since Trial of the Grand Crusader to feature a special reward for not having died once whilst defeating all bosses on the hardest difficulty, awarding the Chosen title. But the Hellier encounter was the real challenge here. One guild, Limit, discovered that having a tank die during the cast of one of the boss's breath mechanics would cause that ability to not go off. Though to their surprise, this also stopped the boss from doing this mechanic at all in the last phase. Very diligently, they notified Blizzard and decided that this was obviously a bug, and should they kill the boss using this exploit, it probably wasn't going to end well for them. But it was only some 300 pulls later they had found out other top-end guilds, Exorcist and From Scratch, had secured world 1st and 2nd Mythic Hellier using this exploit with no repercussions, though Limit decided to follow along. After all, there'd been no punishment so far, right? Well, for some reason at this point, Blizzard decided to do something about it. All 3 of these guilds got their titles and items removed, as well as being hit with an 8-day ban. It's a bizarre timeline of events when Limit informed Blizzard about the exploit, saw other guilds exploit, and only after they assumed it was okay and did it themselves did anything happen. Either way, they accepted responsibility rather than complaining about it. A lot of guilds would have complained about it, so fair play to them here. I think now the veil has been pulled back and all the top guilds stream with tons of sponsors and make the race to world first a big public event, seeing bans for exploits or bug abuse these days just doesn't make sense anymore. Dreaming bug abuse when you stand to lose out financially is probably not worth 15 minutes of fame of having your name as world first, especially when the top guilds in the world have the race super locked down right now. Either way, it's interesting to see how Blizzard has dealt with this topic over the years, and how the race has come so far from being totally hidden behind closed doors with speculation on forums to now being such a big deal that people around the world look forward to tuning into. Do you know of any other big guild ban moments that you remember over the years? Definitely drop them down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.